This presentation will cover claims. Claims are really the starting point of analyzing an argument. We'll see that claims are what an audience is asked to accept on the basis of some reason. Now, let's start talking about the nature of a claim and what three conditions make a claim, and then we can start to talk about the different types of claims that exist. Claims, first of all, assert things to be true. If there's no assertion of truth made, it's not a claim. So there has to be some sort of subject and a predicate in the sentence. Bob is an airline pilot, for example. This asserts something to be true. Today is Wednesday. It's cold outside. We should go to the movies. Something like this. There is a subject and there is a predicate, and so there are statements which are simple assertions of truth. They require support. Now, this is really important because we're about to make a distinction between a claim and something else. We need to understand that claims are only as strong as the support offered for them. So like a house, by analogy, it is only going to be able to stand as well as its foundation allows it to stand, or any of its other supportive structures. So goes for claims. They're only going to be as strong as their underlying support. Now, statements that require no support are called premises. They assert things to be true, but they require no additional support. They are either self-evident or they are so widely agreed upon that it would simply be a waste of time and mere pedantry to try to prove them to be so. Given the right agreement, now claims can be promoted to the status of premises, and the other way around, a premise, if questioned, could be demoted to the status of claim. So it's not necessarily the case that premises and claims will always remain in that status. It may change given the audience, given the state of our knowledge, and so on. For example, it used to be merely a claim that the Earth revolved around the sun. That is now taken as a scientific premise, which no one really questions anymore. Third, claims may be tested according to certain standards of truth or falsity. Now, it's one thing to assert things to be true. It is quite another thing to be able to test the truth or falsity of a claim. And I hope that's fairly obvious. We can say things are true all day long, but there may be no real way to test. For example, if I assert that there is an invisible unicorn in the room with you right now as you are reading this and is learning this material along with you, not only is it invisible, but it gives off no odor, no smell, no anything. And in fact, if you were to pass next to it, you wouldn't actually touch it, but you would walk right through it. You would probably say, well, that seems to be false to me. And I'll say, well, you really can't test it. You just got to take my word for it. Well, that kind of claim is simply not susceptible to any kinds of test that we would be able to say this is true, this is false. So that kind of statement really is not a claim in any useful sense. And so now you're probably already thinking, well, what does that do for statements of faith? Well, statements of faith are just that. They require not so much empirical evidence, but what they require is simple assent based on other considerations. And so statements of faith are often treated as claims, but in some real respects, they can't be treated in the same way as Bob is an airline pilot. It can't be subjected to the same writing tests. Although there is an entire field called apologetics, which is all about providing good reasons to believe the assertions that are statements of faith. And so that gets into another realm, and we're really not going to go much into that here. Now, there are several synonyms for for claims. There's the assertion, conclusion, point. For example, what point are you making? A proposition, a statement, and a thesis. Now, we may use these terms more or less interchangeably at times. In fact, but thesis has a special meaning in most English classes, referring to the thesis statement, which is a lesson we'll get into in a couple of weeks. Now, there are four kinds of claims, and we're going to talk about them. The first is a fact claim, the second is a definitional claim, the third is a value claim, and the fourth is a policy claim. But to begin with the fact claim, all claims answer questions, so let's talk about each in terms of what kind of questions they answer. The fact claim will answer the question, is X or did X occur? Strictly speaking, it deals with what is here and now or what was so in the past. Will X occur? This is a prediction. This will happen in the future and can be treated in many ways like a fact claim. But if we're talking about fact as in what is or has been the case, it doesn't strictly fall under the category, but I see no problems with treating predictions much in the same way you treat fact claims. An example would be, for example, William Shakespeare is not the author of the plays attributed to him. There is a school of thought that holds that William Shakespeare was not able to have written the plays that he wrote, given his upbringing, given lots of other facts about his life, given some documentary evidence that shows that he didn't spell his name in the same way in the same document, that he may have been barely literate, some have suggested. Now, the general consensus is that this is a crackpot theory, and that we'd be well advised simply to believe, as all authorities have thus far believed, who have gone with the traditional view that William Shakespeare is in fact the author of his plays. This one, about 20% of college students who enroll in college courses will complete an associate's or the equivalent after 3 years. That answers a different question. This is, by the way, a real statistic. It is a national statistic. It is true of two-year schools all over the nation. And one way to ensure that you will complete is to faithfully attend your courses and to do all the work that you've been assigned. So it is very doable to complete your education, but attending and doing the assignments is simply the way to do it. Now, the definitional claim answers questions like this: what do we call X, or into what category does X properly belong? You may see those as really the same question. An example, I'm going to start with some controversial examples. Abortion is murder, or to the contrary, abortion is a medical procedure. You can see right away, and I do not use these controversial examples to debate these questions or to try to get you to believe one way or the other. That's simply not my purpose here. My purpose is to show here's how a rhetorician looks at claims like this. They categorize these as definitional claims. Abortion is murder. Murder is quite obviously an impermissible, immoral, reprehensible act of taking innocent life. A medical procedure, now that does not suggest the same thing at all. It suggests simply a procedure whereby the body's health is ensured, which we take on the whole to be a good thing and sometimes a necessary one. Murder doesn't fall in the same category. So abortion is debated at the level very often of what to call it, and that has to do with some of the facts that are involved, such as when life begins and so on. Here is another controversial example, and I bring these up, again, not to debate these questions, but to show that the debate hinges on what something is called. So the Bible is the Word of God is a claim that's often made. And we talked about apologetics. This is the kind of claim that may or may not be, depending on who you ask, susceptible to certain tests of truth or falsehood. But the fact that this is such a debated question is strongly suggestive evidence that people do believe that that claim is susceptible to claims, just to tests of truth or falsehood. So the Bible is the Word of God is certainly a different claim from saying this: the Bible is an ancient anthology of religious writings, no more. So how we would treat the Bible if it's the Word of God is far different from how we would treat it if it's an ancient anthology of religious writings. And so you can see that much proceeds from our definitions of things. Again, the point of these controversial examples is simply to show how definitions can be very weighty indeed. Value claims, also potentially very weighty. They answer the following questions, such as what is the worth of X in the following ways? Is X good or is it bad? In other words, is it a sound or unsound specimen of this sort of thing it is? Is it beneficial or harmful? Answers questions of utility. Does it does it bring about our happiness in some way, or does it make our lives livable in some way? Or is it morally right or morally wrong? This deals with, again, morality and ethics. Is it beautiful or ugly? This deals with questions of aesthetics. So I put utility and morality and ethics together for reasons that will be apparent later on in the semester when we talk about arguing about moral issues, where utility and comes along with questions of ethics. It's one of the major approaches, in fact, to what is an ethical or an unethical action. Here's an example of a value claim. It is immoral to lie to children about the existence of Santa Claus. This question gets debated sometimes right around Christmas time, and whether the lying to children is as morally justified or not. Some would even like to dispute the very choice of terms lie, when it could be just playing a game, as some may call it. Some may dispute that, however, on the grounds that when one plays a game with someone else, one knows that it's a game, and children do not know that. Another example of a value claim is that the original Star Wars trilogy is in every respect superior to the prequels from 1999 to 2005. And those of you who have experienced both would probably agree with that claim of value. And by any standard, you could measure it, whether that's in terms of plot, dialogue, pacing. Perhaps you would give special effects over to the prequels, unless you might argue that the special effects in the original prequels were overkill, and the tendency of George Lucas to play too much with his CGI, and that's a common complaint. So these are value claims. Now, do you care to debate these questions? That depends entirely upon who you're talking to and what your priorities are. But these are perfectly good examples of value claims. Finally, we have a policy claim, which answers the following question: well, what should be done about X? We can talk about whether X happened, we can talk about what we should call it, we can talk about what its worth is, but we can't really talk about what we're going to do with it until we've decided all of those things. We can't really decide what to do, for example, about abortion if we have not first decided whether it's murder or it's a medical procedure. And related to that, how do we determine the worth? Obviously, murder has been devalued. It's not worth, it's not morally right, and so we would outlaw it or ban it. If it's a medical procedure, we tend to see those things as good, and we would take the policy that it should be legalized. And so those are the two different approaches to that. And so you can see how definition leads to value and to policy. An example of a policy claim should be something as innocuous as we should print for the original trilogy Star Wars films, or to prevent children from having an unfair advantage over other children. Wealthy parents should not send their children to private schools, but should enroll them in public schools along with everyone else. This is a fairly commonly debated topic. What's the nature of the public good, where money should go, where it should be invested, and so on, and the nature of a democracy and questions like that. So we see some pretty good examples of 4 different types of claims, and we understand that each one of these claims asserts something to be true, requires some support because they aren't obvious in most cases to everyone, and there is some way that we can test these claims. We can find out whether they are the case given the relevant considerations. Now, for an analysis and isolating claims, we'll start this in a second video, so stay tuned for that.